Hello, it's me again with another demo. This time it's going to be almost exactly an hour long, a little bit over, I guess. And I'm painting this scene that you'll see in the photograph that I've got up right now in the Cobra water miscible oils. I decided to use those on arch Huile oil painting paper as a little bit of a change. Lately, I've been doing so much work in acrylic, and I just started to feel a little bit like I needed a fresh change of pace, and so I've been doing a lot of small studies in oil, primarily just to kind of work through some ideas. They're all studies of things that I might do in a painting, and that's what this demo will be about. So I'll walk you through it, and we're about to start the actual painting process. So as usual, my palette is titanium white, cad lemon yellow, cad yellow deep, yellow ochre, cad red light. I've got some burnt sienna on there, some alizarin crimson. Actually, I think it's madder deep is actually the deep purple red that Cobra has. Some ultramarine blue, some manganese blue, and the last one is phthalo green because they don't make a viridian, or I didn't find a viridian when I was looking. So I've used these paints a lot in the past and have good and mixed emotions about them. They're really nice. I mean, for me, it's nice because I'm already working with water-based paints so much, gouache and acrylic, that switching gears and pulling out an oil paint that I can keep the water tub on the palette going from cleaning brushes and all that. Yeah, I don't know. It's very nice to switch back and forth in that way instead of hauling out solvent and traditional oil painting supplies, which I've been doing a lot lately. So I don't know. This demo that I'm doing for you actually inspired me to probably do a little bit more with these paints. They're pretty nice to use. So right now I'm just mixing up. Well, I'm going to paint the darks and the shadow areas first of this painting. This painting is mostly about the idea of the light in the middle distance in the background against all the other cooler blues, blue grays, sand color grays that are in shadow. So I'm going to paint the darks in varying mixtures of coolness and grayness. And it's a photo. It's not plein air painting, so I can't really see what everything is. So I'm just going for general shapes, general values, and I'll be pretty specific about color, but I can't see enough in that photo to allow me to worry about what are they. Are they weeds? I mean, I know it's kind of a sand dune that's been eroded away, but I'm not going to worry about what else is there. I'm going to look for shapes and color and edges and that sort of thing, texture. Using these paints, if you haven't tried them, they're definitely worth a try. And I'm using, when I went to buy, okay, so long story short, I used to use these a lot. And I had built up quite a supply of them. When we moved into our new studio, we had to eliminate a lot. Like a lot, most, probably 2/3 of our studio mass. So I had donated my Cobra oils that I had left, and I had quite a few, to a local art supply store called Starlandia Art Supply, which you take supplies in there and basically donate them. They give you a small stipend for what you bring in that you can use to buy more art supplies. And then they sell them at an extreme discount because there's so many art students here with SCAD, so they sell them at an extreme discount. So it's a really good deal. Like if you just have too much stuff and you don't want to take the time to try to go market it somewhere, you can give it away and get a little bit out of it, and it does someone else some good. So anyways, I got rid of all my Cobra oil paints. So a while back I decided, well, there are times when I might like to use them. So I had to go out and buy a basic palette that you see here. But when I did, excuse the local Blick store was out of any large tubes of Rembrandt or of the Cobra White. So I bought Holbein White, and I've used the Holbein. It's okay to mix them. I've used the Holbein water miscible paints in the past, and they're much stiffer compared to the Rembrandt. The Rembrandt Cobra is really almost like a traditional oil paint in most every way. I mean, it's got the same consistency, the same, it's kind of like thick mayonnaise, so it blends really well and all that. Because one thing about these water miscible paints is that they seem to do better if you don't use a lot of water with them. The water is there to clean your brush out with or wash up with, but really they're not that great of a product if you mix a lot of water with them, other than in the initial stages. So the Holbein White's kind of stiff, and the Holbein paints are kind of stiff. So but the white's okay. It mixes well. So to thin the paint, you can use water, but if you use water a lot of water, it kind of clouds it up, and it'll dry okay. But while you're painting with it, it's kind of cloudy. So I use a medium, and my preferred medium is their quick drying medium. And the reason is these things, to me, dry slow, even compared to regular oil paints. And that's probably because I use dryers in my regular oil paints. I use Galkin or Liquid or whatever, or a quick dry white. So I try to get them to dry a little faster. And these paints dry very much slower, more like traditional oil paint. So that and I want something in there to help speed up the drying time. So I use the quick drying white. They also make a paste, and they make another medium. I think it's just called painting medium, but that just makes them dry slower. So I use the quick drying medium if I need it. Maybe a touch of water just to help that down. Anytime my hand disappears and it's gone for a while, I have my taboret next to me on my right, so I'm probably down there grabbing a knife or maybe mixing with a little water on my glass palette. This vertical palette, I don't do this very much. So the vertical palette with a camera right at your right shoulder to film this was a difficult thing. Like, I bounced it a couple times, you'll see it. It's hard to mix vertically. That was giving me a hard time because I'm used to mixing on a flatter surface. So once in a while I'll go down to the palette just to mix colors up. So you can see the colors I'm mixing in here, so I'm not saying too much about it, but it's a gray, blue in the sky. The photo reference to me was a little too blue all the way around. I think the camera did that. So I'm going to attempt to warm up some of the shadow areas a little bit, because I think in the photo they're just too blue gray. I'm gonna make sure that I get them a little warmer. Anytime painting from a photo reference or life, it's not gonna be the same as what the image is, and certainly the case here. The image is the inspiration for doing something. What I'm doing now is just using the palette knife to apply a little thicker paint and kind of draw that upper edge of the dunes as I go off into the distance. This is at the north end of Tybee on a cool November morning, and I guess that's one of the things to try to keep in mind when painting, is that the time of day, temperature of the day, the atmosphere that was there has to do with how the photo looks, and has to do with how I want the painting to look. So you see, even in the sky, I'm adding the darkest parts of the sky first. So between the sky and the land, all the darker areas are going in before I put the lights in. And I think that's always a better approach than, I'll take that back. Sometimes, if there's a really highly intensely lit object or part of the composition, sometimes it's okay to just go put that in, and then that's your limit. You know, that keeps everything else subordinate, or everything else should be subordinate to that. So I'll go ahead and put in those kind of things. I might include another photo when I post this of an example of that, where I painted in the whole cloud mass because it was just completely contrasted to everything else in the composition, and then painted around it. So that is the way. But in this case, I'm laying in all the darkest areas of the sky, all the darkest areas of the land mass, and then I'll add the lights to it. These paints are going on this paper really well. So I used to do quite a bit with this and arch paper on a larger scale. I've used these paints on, I think I used them on one painting that was 40 by 60. So I've used these paints on very large paintings and been pretty happy with them. They're maybe a little less intense in their pigment strength than a decent traditional oil paint, but that may also just be because they have a different medium in the emulsifier in them, so that it makes them water miscible. They don't have as much oil, you know, and I'm not adding any oil, so I don't know. I'm not sure what the difference is. There's a slight difference in the intensity. It's like using some of the, when this class of paint first came out, there was one called Grumbacher Max, and I think that's the first one I remember using, and this goes way back, like, I don't know, early mid-90s, something like that. And then the Winsor Newton version came out, and I forget what they call theirs because I haven't used them in a long time. Artisan, I think, or, well, anyways. And they were really low in pigment strength, you know, so they're kind of like second class art, you know, oil paints. Rembrandt came up with the Cobra line, again, probably early 2000s, mid 2000s, something like that. And they were definitely a huge improvement. But they seem to be even better now. So it's a nice thing about these companies that produce these things, like acrylics too. They do keep improving the quality, because there's a lot of painters out there who want to use this kind of product, especially acrylics and the water miscible oils, because you don't have to deal with solvents. You know, you don't have to deal with things that are a little harsher. So, anyways, what I'm working on now is that lowest light part of the sky that's beyond the gray, and it's got a little bit of a warmth to it, a little bit of a yellow ochre with a little bit of red tint to it, from what I can tell. So I'm going to try to put that in. One thing that I'm noticing is, in creating something like this for filming, I feel kind of restricted. Like, I can't just like throw my arm, or you'll suddenly see the whole situation disappear because the camera falls over. It's sitting on a tripod on my tabouret, like about 6 inches from my ear. But that's the only way I could get all of this in and get a decent squareness to the painting itself. I will zoom in a little later and, you know, just work on smaller, closer parts of the painting, and some of the palette will be hidden, but that's okay. You're going to watch the palette for quite a way, so you'll get the idea what's going on. That's manganese blue that I'm mixing in there, because that sky has a little bit more of a greenish note to it than the more violet gray note of the clouds. And I suppose if I were painting with a more full palette, like I might have had cobalt blue on my palette if I was using traditional oils. I don't have a cobalt blue in this particular paint. I probably use cobalt blue up there because the manganese is a little too green for that far up in the sky. But I'm mixing a little bit of ultramarine with it in hopes that it brings that green down a little bit. So we'll see what happens, but that's my plan. Brushes on this paint, right now I'm just using Utrecht's Rhenish hog hair bristle brush. It's all natural bristle, but I also do use some throughout the painting. I'll be using, I actually pulled out quite a few brushes, but I'll be using some synthetics, rosemary. I'll have to put it in the notes because I'm not sure the name. I haven't used them in so long, but they seem to work out pretty good. But it looks like the fake mongoose hair, or it is fake mongoose hair. I forget what they call it. And it's a very long flat, so I'll use those. But otherwise, these hog bristles do the trick. I've noticed painting on this paper, which is kind of absorbent, with traditional oils or this water miscible oil, that using a palette knife is a big help. Palette knife spreads it beautifully on the paper. You can add a lot of paint really fast, and it's an indispensable tool. And also, it's helpful for knocking things down, scraping things off when you build too much up on the paper. I used to, when I use this paper for oil paints, I used to give it one light spray of a retouch varnish, synthetic retouch varnish like Kmart, because it was so absorbent. But now I kind of like the absorbency. I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that you can start out using it almost like a watercolor paper if you want, or you can start out using it like I am in this case, just very full strength. So I quit spraying it because if you spray it, it loses that capability to sort of be like a watercolor paper. I've done some paintings where they're completely transparent and they look like watercolors, where the pigment settled in to the paper, just like watercolor does. And I'll include those in a post too, so that you can see what I'm talking about. But in this case, I'm just using it straight. Now this brush is a synthetic rosemary, evergreen, I think it's called. And it's got some stiffness to it. You almost, on this paper, you almost have to push paint around more than brush it. So a stiffer brush does seem to work a little better until you get some real delicate touches. Whoops, hit the camera, sorry. One thing I've noticed is that when I want to lay more paint on into wet paint, which is what I'm trying to do there, a longer, softer brush, this is a slightly longer, softer flat, and then load the brush up really well, thin it down a little bit so that it's got a little bit more soupy quality, and then load the brush up with it, and then you see how I hold the brush and lay it on so that the bristles are a little flatter on the surface, so that you're dragging paint off the side of the brush, basically, not the edge side, but the face side. If you use the tip of the bristles, now in that case I am, because I'm doing sort of a drawing, and I didn't want that paint to be just completely obvious. I wanted it to be a little bit subtle. So by using the end into that wet paint, it mixes the two a little bit. But that's what happens if you use the end of the brush all the time, just point it at the painting and paint with the end of it. You're bringing up paint from underneath constantly. Where if you want to lay paint on and you hold the brush more horizontal to the surface, loaded, and then you drag it across the surface, you'll put more paint body onto the painting. It allows the paint to come off the brush more easily. That's why they always say a brush has 6 sides. The face, 2 faces to it, 2 side edges, and then the front end. That's, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5. Maybe the handle is the 6th one. So this is a palette knife, and I'm using this just because I want there to be a little bit more of a what's the word, mechanical edge to part of that cloud. So it's more of a straighter line, and I can come in and manipulate it a little bit. But the brush was just kind of giving me kind of a soft, mushy line, and I just want more paint on there. And I wanted it on in a more direct, straight line. I can come in and mess that up later, but if everything's too wobbly, it just looks wobbly. It doesn't look more natural. This is one of those things where I'm not trying to copy exactly what's there. I'm looking for the character of what's there, the nature of what's there, using the parts of it that fit me best. But it's not a task of trying to imitate that photograph. It's a task of trying to find things in the photograph that are useful, inspirational, important to the image, and then use those or manipulate those, lose them, change them to fit your image. Because that's what it's all about, is whether it's from life or whether it's from a photograph, it's all about creating your own idea of what this thing is you're painting is all about. What is it about it that attracted your eye, as the creative individual creating it, that might interest someone else? I mean, first of all, it's what your interest is, but second of all, what excites me about this? Why? Okay, so it excites me. Maybe it'll excite somebody else. That's kind of what we're doing. So the color of the beach, excuse me, of the sand, I kind of went into it not really sure where I wanted it to go, but I knew I didn't want it to be as blue as it is in the photograph. It's just too blue. I mean, I've been out there enough to know that the sand is such a warm thing anyways, that it always has a bit of that earthy gray, warm gray to it, no matter what the light's doing. So I made the choice to warm it up a little bit, so it's got some red in it, some burnt sienna, so that it didn't have that just sort of, the sand in the photograph to me almost looks like snow. You know, it could almost be snow instead of sand. So I want my sand to look like sand, not snow. I guess that's my point. So I'm putting a lot of paint on there with the palette knife, which I'll later will manipulate with the brush. You notice how, as I'm mixing these colors, you know, I pull out just the slightest little bit at times so that I don't create just a big pile of something that I can't use. So just slight little touches of color shifts. I think it's so much better than just, you know, going overboard with it right away. I mean, you know, I see this a lot as people are learning to mix paint and learning how to manipulate paint. You know, if you're going to make a color shift, a lot of times people will grab like enough for about, you know, 5 paintings to make the color shift. Even if I'm mixing it with a brush, I'll touch the brush and maybe go hit another part of the palette just to get it off the brush, and then I have enough. You know, it's just such a subtle process. And you know, all depends. If you're painting a big painting, you're mixing a lot of paint, then that's a completely different thing. I mean, you have a huge pile that you can pull off of and manipulate. But this is a pretty small painting, and it's also just an hour long. So you're watching the whole thing. I didn't cut anything out of this. So it is. I decided that I would try to keep it at an hour and show you what I could in that time. I'm cooling the sand as it goes off in the distance in anticipation of all those warm lights that you can see in the photo reference on the grasses in the beach. So while I'm keeping it warmer towards the viewer, towards the foreground, in distance, that brush is a Winsor Newton University white sable, FYI. Very soft, nice white sable. But so I want that sand to cool as it goes off in the distance, and then that will be a nice foil against those warmer yellows, oranges, and ochre colors that will go in a little while. Mix up a violet there, and then decide to gray it with a little yellow ochre. A little burnt sienna, a little ultramarine blue. Working up a dark gray. To kind of hit the edge of the shadow that's on some of the grass up in the foreground. And I'm starting to paint the water in. So off in the distance, the water gets a little bit green as the light hits it. Then as it comes down into the foreground, it goes into more of a, I don't know, like a blue, like ultramarine red kind of a violet. And then on top of that, there'll be some more almost iridescent kind of highlights, like cerulean yellow and green kind of highlights. So, but this is just a base for the water. I'm trying to get the shape in, and little bit of that gradation in color as it goes up towards the horizon. I don't know about you all, but we have had an amazing spring, like pollen everywhere. Yesterday I was out and had to get the blower out because our driveway was about an inch or two thick in oak worms, you know, the flowers that come off the oak tree. And we're done with the pine pollen, but now the oak worms are falling everywhere. And when I blew that off into flower gardens and stuff as mulch, and all the air around the house here was just yellow. And I mean, I'm still feeling it today. My eyes, my nose, my ears, everything was coated in pollen. Hope you're having a good spring. So now I'm mixing up the color that will go into those distant grasses on the dune, and then the distant grasses as they go off to the right on the horizon. And I'm mixing a bit of an orange, and then you'll see me reach up to the left a little bit and grab some of that blue and gray it slightly. Then I mixed up a yellow because I know there's several different colors that I want to have up in there. Of course, once you get going, the best way to figure out if it works is to try it. So I just put a little bit up there with the palette knife and could see that it's close. So I'm going to try and use the palette knife again to add more of it, but there's so much, the paint's kind of thick up there, so I'm going to have to put more on with a brush eventually. But that gave me a good idea about the closeness of the color that I wanted. So that is one of the rosemary flats that I like to use. I found myself using, I should say, and it is the rosemary Eclipse long flat. It was like about a number 6. So that's the one that she developed after it became illegal, impossible, to get mongoose hair. And years ago, when I took a workshop with Richard Schmid, like in 1990 or 1989, the revelation, besides, you know, getting to watch him paint, the revelation were the Langnickel mongoose hair brushes that he used. So, of course, I and everybody else who found out about that bought a whole bunch of them. I'm thankful I did. I still have some, but it wasn't soon after that. Well, it was a number of years after that, I guess. The import and export of that hair from that mongoose became illegal because they were getting rare. So Langnickel tried to come up with a synthetic version of it, and it wasn't very successful. It wasn't very good as a synthetic. But Rosemary came up with a synthetic version of it that's actually pretty good. It's not like the old actual mongoose hair brushes. And it's funny because it was a brush that was originally intended as a ceramics decorative painting brush. So they were intended to put glazes and paint on ceramics. But they just, Schmid probably, I don't know if he found out about them from somebody, but he's the one who was using them. And they were a beautiful brush to use on some of the very fine lead-primed portrait linens that he and people like him, painting like him, were doing back in the day. So it was soft enough to where they could put paint on the fine weave of a slick lead-primed linen and not push through to the surface, you know, like you would with a hog bristle. So they became very popular with portrait painters, and You know, like a lot of art supplies. Like I remember when I was fairly new into painting and learning about watercolor and things like that, there was a paper that British watercolorists in particular, but a lot of watercolorists love to use. It's called Whatman, Whatman, and it was a handmade watercolor paper from Great Britain. Well, it disappeared. They quit making it. I don't know, the mill closed down or something like that. And the same with Wallace pastel paper. Kitty Wallace made this pastel paper that was one of the reasons why I painted in pastel for so long, because it was absolutely beautiful to paint on. And she ran into an issue with finding the grit. The story was that the Chinese bought up every last speck of the grit that she was using in her mixture to coat paper to use for some sort of industrial grinding that they were doing for industry. So she was without the main ingredient that produced her paper. So she tried a few other things. It never really worked that well. And then she just quit making it. So it's just like we run into this all the time with art supplies. You know, you get used to something and you find out, wow, it works really well for me. And then, boom, it's gone. You know, someone, for some reason, production quits or materials dry up. You know, that's happened recently with quinacridone, or with quinacridone gold. The raw material that makes quinacridone gold is gone. The factory who was making it just quit making it. So, like in a lot of paints, like acrylics, there's something called quinacridone burnt orange. There's quinacridone gold. You know, you'll find, if you find it, it's not made with the material that it was made with. It's made with substitute pigments, because that pigment is no longer available. This happened a couple of years ago. Excuse me. So we're just always facing that. You know, you get used to something. That's why I like to jump around mediums and surfaces, because you just never know when your favorite thing's going to either become too expensive to use anymore, which is happening right now. Art supplies are crazy. Or it just disappears. Or they quit making it. When Fredericks quit priming, they had two canvases called, one was Rix, R-I-X, and one was Carleton, C-A-R-E-L-T-O-N. They quit priming those with lead, and they started priming them with a different kind of titanium primer. It was worthless. It wasn't even the same canvas. So I was using a lot of Rix at the time, so I had to go and find a new canvas to use altogether. So I zoomed in a little bit so you could see a little closer what I'm painting here. I'm working on that distant headland, tree line, and you know, just messing around with it, trying to make it interesting. I wanted to break it up a little bit, so I took out, made a little notch there, so that it wasn't just a straight edge going all the way across. There's some light on it, very muted greens where the sunlight's coming across from the left and hitting it. It's kind of coming from my back left shoulder. That's how the sunlight was hitting the scene in the photograph. So I know you can't see exactly what I'm mixing right here, but you'll see me dipping into the colors. So that's a little bit of a yellow on the tree line, a little yellow green, a little bit too much. So I'm going to take some out with my finger. Best tool ever. That one I hope never goes away. Here's a little phthalo green that I'm dipping into, which is just so strong. I always get in trouble with it, but it gives you that nice, good, clear green, so I'm using it. I want these trees here just to catch a little bit of the light that's hitting the grasses and the beach. But my main goal, remember, is to concentrate the light right in that lower off-center area of the grasses and the light on the beach. And it's hard not to put all that, like the light on the beach that you can see in the photograph, it's hard not to put that in now. You know, I mean, I want to put it in, but I'm going to resist that as long as possible, because that would not be the wise thing to do. The wise thing is to get all the other structure built up around it and then add it at the end. But you have to make sure that you get, like, am I dark enough in the beach? I don't know. Maybe could go darker. But I think in the actual painting, when I was painting on it, it felt like I was dark enough. And, you know, that's your choice. You can exaggerate it, accentuate it, however you want. I wish I was standing there painting it from life, because then that answers those kind of questions. Again, you know, working from photographs, as we all know, you have to make decisions based on your best guess of what's going on. So I'm just using my best guess as to what the right amount of value contrast should be. So working on this water, it had kind of a weird wave pattern that was coming in. If I remember, the wind was blowing pretty good. So if you look at the photograph, you can see where there's some wind effect on the waves. They're kind of being pushed up the scene, but the waves are coming in from the right to the left. So it's two things happening at once. And I'm not going to worry about being that accurate with it, because I'm just looking for the idea of the water and the shoreline. So I'll use some of that, but I'm not going to worry too much about it otherwise. I still haven't addressed that big dark shape on the left. It needs to have, there's sand on it, you know, grasses, I guess. I can't really tell what they all are. So right now I'm going to put in something that represents the sand color in my mind. And I'm using a knife because I can get a nice big juicy stroke. You know, and I can manipulate that with my brush if I need to later, or the knife. But I want to get the paint on there so that I make the statement, and then I'll come back and probably noodle it to death. So I make some alizarin and some phthalo green to gray it, and some white. And there's a little bit of yellow in that mixture too. And just switch away from the knife to the brush, and then put a little green in there just to help gray it. You know, if you look at the painting, in the palette for that matter, but there aren't a lot of there's not a lot of variety in the color. It kind of runs from a yellow, green, blue palette into a little bit of the reddish notes. But so I'm constantly mixing grays, complementary grays. You know, I'll mix a violet, then add a little yellow to it. Mix a reddish violet, add a little green to it. So that the quality of the color is more grayed than intense. Because I wanted the intensity to be that grass line in the distance. So everything else needs to be subordinate to it and needs to be played down a little bit so that shows up like it should. Here I'm trying to figure out. So I really want to put my elbow way far out to the right so I can work on that, but then I would knock the camera over. So I'm trying to figure out how to I'm trying to get my motor skill apparatus working in a different way. I'm not used to working sort of confined like that. But that happens, I guess. I was going to do this demo outside in plein air, but I went outside to pick a spot to do it, and the glare was awful. We had just like this, nothing but blue sky yesterday, and I couldn't figure out a way to set it up and not get the glare on the painting. I even have a little bit here in the studio where I can control things a little bit more. But outside, I was just thinking, it's going to be a mess. And when I do these demos, I like to give you as good a visual presentation as I can so that you can see what's going on. Because I'm not teaching you, but it's meant to be a video that lets you see what's going on specifically. Not one where you just see a painting being done, that's not in focus or not. You can't see it because of the glare. So one of these days I'll get set up outside under an umbrella or something and be able to do that. But might have to do it in gouache because it doesn't have any glare on it. But I wanted to do an oil painting because I know a lot of people have written me and they like the acrylic demos and the gouache demos, but they want to see an oil demo. So that's what I'm doing. Now I'm starting to put in some of that beach light. And I mixed up a value color, and I used the knife to just kind of put it on there, and it didn't really come off the knife very good. So I got more on there, and I'll see what happens if I add more paint and just touch it. And that kind of like just left this mushy thing. There we go. Now I've got a statement about the light, and so I'll continue with that idea. So there's, because it's sliding across over the dunes, then hitting the sand 2 or 3 times as it goes off into the distance. Some have to be larger than others, so there's some perspective involved to that. And what I'm doing there is I'm just taking the flat of the knife, pushing it up against the paint, and then using that edge of the knife to kind of help draw that lower edge of that piece of paint that is the light. So it's a little, see, I'm just taking paint off, making it a little bit more flat than what it was. It had kind of a hump in it. And I do that a lot, just using, you have paint on there, so you have enough paint, and just using the flat of the knife against it so I don't remove paint, and then drawing with that upper edge of the knife, just pulling across, clean up an edge of a piece of color, piece of paint, or eliminate it, or soften. The knife is just great for doing all kinds of little things. Now there, I wanted to pull a little line of dark that shows the perspective of the grass going off farther. So I just took the point of the knife, kind of bent it in there onto that dark color and pulled it to the right, which created the appearance of that dune going farther off into the distance with the grass on top of it. This is the last light that's shooting across. This will be the big one. So once I kind of indicate where it's going to be, then I'll put more paint on to help finalize it. And this is just a mixture of white with some orangish yellow in it. It doesn't have a lot of color. It's I think it's warmer than it looks in the video. I took a final photo of the painting, so you'll be able to see the color a little better. But that's the idea, is to let that sunshine show up a little bit in that light. So you can see now why all the other areas were painted in first, so that they would be a foil for those lights. All I'm doing now is just working with the sand, cleaning up little edges up there, because there's nothing about the edge of that dune that, as it hits the sand, that is perfect or clean. There's all kinds of stuff coming off of it. I like just eliminated so much of the beach riffraff, if you want to call it that, the grasses and the washed up wrack and all that that comes off of the water when the tide comes up. Well, this has a little bit of cerulean blue in it and white, and a little bit of alizarin crimson for the edge of the water as it comes down. I'm using a little it's actually a little brush that I sign paintings with that's worn out, but it's a little Winsor Newton University white sable. I've used these things since art school, so that goes back quite a ways. And in all different, rounds, flats, little sables, they go all the way down to a 0 or 000, I think. But this is probably a number 2. I use a number 2 or 3 usually to sign paintings with. And the reason I like them is they hold up really well. They last for a long time. You can use them pretty good, and they give you pretty good effort for quite a while before they give it up. They do eventually give it up, and they start like splaying the hairs out and stuff. So then they go into service for something like this, where I need a little brush with a whole lot of paint on it. And it's not for a real specific stroke, because that glob of paint that's on there is going to come off however it wants to come off. But that's good. Sometimes that's what you want. All I'm doing now is trying to get the lay of the water. I want it to have a radiating towards you perspective, like it does, kind of like it does in the photo. So the lines are flatter up towards the horizon, and they radiate down towards you as it comes into the lower part of the painting. I wasn't really sure how that was going to work, so I put something on there and thought, I need to just work that in the paint, because that didn't work like I wanted it to. I'm pushing pretty hard on there so that I mash the paint in. And I don't know how to explain that, but the water has a certain surface to it that feels like it's mashed. And so, pushing the paint in, the paint will kind of work out around the edge of the knife, and it gives me the illusion of what's going on up there. And so that's what I'm doing. I should say, although this is a very specific, realist kind of a scene that I'm painting, there's not a lot in there that you would call is picky detail. I see a lot of things written about not wanting to paint things that look like things, but then they do look like things. But I think what people are just saying is, don't get caught up in the exact replication of what's going on. Everybody has a level of that they do in their painting. And I tend to give, excuse me, I tend to give a pretty representational view of what I'm painting, But I guarantee you, if you see one in real life, there's nothing that's actually real in the painting. It's paint, and it's marks, and it's value and color applied in a way that gives the illusion of that reality. And I, for one, am interested in painting the beauty of nature. I'm not any longer interested in painting the specific details that make up that beauty as separate entities, but I want that beauty of it to be shown in the way that I put the paint on. You know, so I want to put the paint on in a painterly way, but I still want that gorgeous, glorious beauty of nature to show in my work. And it's kind of a tricky balance, because there are some painters who paint the beauty of nature and every single little detail that's there. And that certainly isn't what I try to do, because not for any reason. It's not bad. I think what they do is beautiful. Then again, I think there's some painters who represent the landscape in such an abstract way. One of my favorite ones that I pay a lot of attention to is a Canadian painter named Susan Woolgar, and I'll put a link to her in the post. But I just love her work, and some of it's completely abstracted, but it's still got that natural beauty, that it's a very nature-oriented kind of painting, but in a very abstract way. So everybody has their way of putting it down and saying things about it, thinking about it. But I will say that I would suggest you not get swayed into thinking that if you want to paint something that looks like nature, that you're doing something less than good, you know. Everybody has their own way of painting. If you want to paint every stick, the light and shadow on every stick and blade of grass, go for it. If you want to paint every stick, shadow, and blade of grass in one big swell brush stroke, go for it. That's what we do. We do what we want to do as individuals creating artwork. I'm very interested in the intricacies of nature, because I think that is what being alive is about, is seeing that and being influenced by it. But I don't want to paint them all individually. I had a period of time where I did that on birds and all their little surroundings. But I don't want to lose it either. So I keep trying to find a way to paint it without painting it in full complexity, if that makes sense. If any of this makes sense. It's kind of a tangent. But anyways, on a lot of small studies I've been doing lately, I'm really enjoying finding ways to interpret, and a lot of them are from photographs, but finding ways to interpret things in a painterly way, but keeping the naturalism of it. I guess there's my theme right there. Paint in a painterly way, but keeping the naturalism of the subject at hand. To me, that's interesting. I don't get bored with that. I don't feel like I'm doing something that isn't me. Like if I try to do an abstract painting, I feel like I'm trying to do an abstract painting, but that's not who I am. And I think that's disingenuous to do that. It's fun, and you can do it. I a lot of times just wish that's what I did, but it is kind of disingenuous, I believe, for me to do that. I don't care what anybody else does. You look around at what's going on right now in painting, and there's people painting from every perspective and every angle, and every thought process. So that's just some of my thought about it. My only pet peeve is when people tell you that what you do isn't the right way, that their way is the right way. That doesn't work in anything in life, as far as I'm concerned. And it doesn't work in painting. So I'm working on the upper edge of those dunes, and I did not blow up my photograph so I could see what was going on there. And I can't tell you what's going on in there. I'm just trying to make an interesting dark shape that looks kind of vegetative, like it looked on top of the dunes. And I have an hour to do this. And that's what I decided I would do is just give the indication of it, not spend a lot of time trying to understand it fully. So I'm adding a little light over the top, a little bit of lighter green. Getting pretty close to the end. We're about 4 minutes from the end of the video, if you're still with me. Some darks in here. That upper edge has changed since I started because there was a big old clump of something up there, and I thought, it just needs to be simpler, so I'm going to bring some sky down into it. Clean up the dark edge a little bit, clean up the sky edge a little bit. Now I'm just kind of looking at it and going, what else do I need to do or not need to do? And the painting at this point kind of felt like it was nearing the end. I realized I need a little bit of lighter blue-green over the top of the water down here where it's, it's kind of in the shadow too from the dune. So it's picking up some sky reflection. And that contrasts nicely with the lighter blue-green that's up in the sunlit area. And so I'm just adding a little bit of that. So I hope you've gotten some info out of this video. Again, these are the Talens Cobra water miscible oils, and they work really well. I'm going to be using them more often. I think I had them in a box, so I drug them out to do this, and I thought it'd be interesting to show you a little different material, a little different medium. I don't know when my next video will be, but I'm going to try and do another one pretty soon again. Sorry for the long break in between. I don't know. Do I have any reasons? But it just was. So we're a couple minutes away with the last finishing touches here. I'm darkening the cool against that light so it shows up a little better. And that's a good thing to do. If your light's not showing cool and dark in the area around it, or if your dark's not showing dark, lighten the light area. Sometimes the best thing to do is to change something next to what you think is a problem. So when I post this, I'll post it up. I'm going to post a bunch of my other studies. I've got this big cartel site, and thank you to everyone who picked up a painting after the last post. I really do appreciate that. I think they have all made it to their destinations at this point. So that needed a little more darkness just to show off that light back there. That's what I'm talking about. The light wasn't showing enough, so I just added a little darkness to it, a little dark value. So there you go. That's the finished painting. Like I said, I'll put up a good photograph of it with good color correction so it looks like the actual painting. But this is it. I'm going to pull off the tape because that's always exciting. And then once it dries up a little bit, I'll give it a signature and then post a photograph of that. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something from it. And I look forward to talking to you on the next one once I get it done. Have a great week, and stay safe and keep your brushes wet.